Every night for the past month I've had the same dream. I find myself on a raft in the middle of an ocean under a clear, cloudless sky. I can feel that my vessel is moving forward, yet it makes no waves on the surface of the clear, still water. When I look down, I see my reflection in the blue mirror. Once I raise my head, I cannot see anything to call a horizon as the water and sky blend together without forming any distinct border between the two. After I wake up and recall the dream, the scenery feels serene, calming, something to get lost in and relax. But in the moment of dreaming, it's maddeningly dull. Anything would be preferable to the boredom. And so, before I even know it, I plunge my head into the water. And the things I see beneath are beautiful, bursting with life and color, moving in chaotic patterns, completely oblivious to my presence. The salt water stings my eyes, yet I cannot bring myself to close them. Soon enough, my entire body is screaming that I should pull back and breathe, that staying like this will kill me. But I only comply at the last possible moment, when I feel like I'm about to pass out. And I jolt awake in my bed, gasping for air again and again every night. And yet, I have no fear when falling asleep. I am looking forward to it. Oh, how I wish I had the words to describe what I see in my dreams to you now, so you could understand why. But every night, before I close my eyes, I wonder if this is going to be it. The dream in which I don't listen to my own lungs screaming in agony, and instead of pulling my head up, I drag my entire body down into the water. And when that happens, will I wake up in the morning like it never happened? Or will that be the last breath I take in the waking world as well? Now, for full transparency, I have to say that everything I just described is a lie. The scene came to me when I was watching a Let's Play of Bloodborne. But it was also the inspiration for this video, so it's only fair that I include it. So don't worry, I am not about to get killed by a suspiciously metaphorical dream. I'm much more likely to die because another vision like this brain blasts me as I'm standing in the middle of a busy intersection. Anyway, let's talk about how and why the concept of knowing things is so common as a source of horror in fiction. The first association with this train of thought that comes to mind is probably the prose of H.P. Lovecraft, the largely interchangeable protagonists realizing their insignificance in the cosmic scale of things, driven mad by that truth, either experienced directly or via texts such as the Necronomicon. Tales of a grand universal order that is not just unconcerned with humanity, but outright incomprehensible to us, of the inevitability of our downfall that only few of us will even begin to understand. But the idea of harmful knowledge is so much older than that. If Laius, the king of Thebes, did not learn of the prophecy that his son, Oedipus, would kill him and marry his own mother, he would not have left his child to die, only for that abandonment to become the first step that would let said prophecy come true, as Oedipus also learns of it and decides to leave his adoptive parents to not harm them. And when the patricide and incest cursal of Thebes, now ruled by Oedipus, the new king is too virtuous and inquisitive to just brush it off as a streak of bad luck and learns the truth behind his parentage. Jocasta, the mother of him and his children, hangs herself and he takes 2 pins out of her dress to blind himself with. A very symbolic form of self-harm, as if seeing the truth of what his actions brought upon his family and city were too much to bear. Or so goes the most famous version of this story, penned by Sophocles. Similarly, in the Bible, the forbidden fruit was from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve, and therefore all of us, were cast out of Eden because they learned what morality is and understood that what they did was wrong. To be in paradise is to not understand the consequences of what you're doing, to not even think of the concept of sin, at least as far as the authors of the book of Genesis are concerned. And I'm sure a similar motive is explored outside of this broadly Western cultural sphere, but I'm hopelessly European, so I'll leave exploring that to those more qualified. And of course, this is also prevalent in common parlance. In English, for example, they warn you to not ask how the sausage is made, or how curiosity kills cats. In Polish, we say something similar. Nie interesuj się, bo koci mord dostaniesz, which roughly translates to stop being so curious or you'll get a cat face. Yeah, I have no idea what this means either. In these two myths, we sort of have 2 subcategories of this kind of horror from knowledge. The tale of King Oedipus is an incredibly common blueprint for fiction to this day. A character causes harm that they are unaware of, and once they learn the truth, there is only despair left because they cannot undo what they've already done. Or a character's actions done to prevent something like the groundwork for it to happen, a self-fulfilling prophecy as they call it. Either way, the truth concerns a specific event, action or person. It's a straightforward thing, and as such I won't talk about it in this video because it's not called The Ending of Oldboy Explained. Watch Oldboy if you haven't. But with the Tree of Knowledge, the horror stems from the truth with a capital T, learning something universal about the world, how it works, your place in it. It's less, wow, I wish I knew the consequence of my actions before I did them, this sucks. And more, oh fuck, I wish I didn't know this, take me back, I don't care if I'm bumbling fool because of my ignorance, I was better off not knowing. And every time I come across this portrayal of forbidden knowledge, things man was not meant to know, little curiosity, a horrible truth, I just feel disconnected. Like, okay, the world is much bigger and less concerned with us than we thought. What of it? Being a huge nerd ever since I was born, I always thought accepting the truth is a simple thing, and if my previously held notions were incorrect, well, that's what learning is. I was elbow deep in pig guts at age 12, city boy, I know how the sausage is made. But ironically, this truth about my disconnection from others disturbs me. Should I trust my own perception of how simple the world is, or is everyone else right to be disturbed by such fictional visions? Are these grand truths about our reality things to simply accept, or horrors I am too stupid to understand the full extent of? Is my life a goddamn Lovecraft story in reverse? Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island, and is widely globally known for two things. Writing a whole lot of short horror stories that ended up creating a mythology of its own, and being an absolute piece of shit racist. Thankfully, he died like 60 years before I was born, so I don't need to worry about the fact that my praise for the former is going to fund him being the latter. While he was not the first to pen horror about an extraterrestrial being that defies human understanding, The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers came out when little Howe was just 5 years old. There is a reason why this brand of tales of terror tends to be called Lovecraftian and not Chambersian. While some of his works can be easy to sum up as hearing rats in your walls is a tad scary, or if you saw a monster and reached out only to realize you're touching a mirror, would that be fucked up or what? He sure was prolific enough to write past that point. Probably the first story by him that resonated with me was the 1922's The Music of Erich Zann, in which a mute violinist plays strange music non-stop in his room, piquing the interest of a student that just moved in next door, who is our point of view character. One day, when listening to the otherworldly music, the student hears the old man scream inside his room and barges in to check on him. The musician, seemingly fine, starts writing notes saying he can explain everything, and he writes and writes and writes for over an hour. Then a low noise comes from outside of the room's window, and Zann just drops everything, grabs his violin and starts playing again in a frenzy, growing more and more terrified. A sudden gust blows open the window and the notes written by the old man fly out the room, and when trying to catch them the student looks out only to see nothing. The street illuminated by lamps is no longer there, replaced by a black void. An infinite abyss of pitch black, as if the candlelit room the two were in was the only speck of light in the entire universe. And Erich Zann keeps playing. Even that small comfort of being in the light does not last, as another gust of wind snuffs the candles out. The student screams in terror and desperately pleads with the musician that they should run. And Erich Zann keeps playing. The terrified student scurries in the dark to reach the old man to save him, nearly brushing against some unknown, chittering things that are there in the dark with them. He reaches the old man and grabs him to carry him out of the room, only to realize that his hands are holding the cold, dead body of the musician. And Erich Zann keeps playing. One of the most famous quotes attributed to Lovecraft is that the most powerful fear there is the fear of the unknown, but that's only half of the truth. There's nothing really scary about an unknown, the things you don't know. There needs to be the small glimpse letting you know that there is something out there, but not enough to give you anything that could reasonably be called understanding it. Sure, there is a perfectly logical explanation of what the hell was haunting Zann, but it's literally out the window, lost in the endless void outside the small room. Neither the student nor the reader will ever know what happened and how music, of all things, held it back. But we know it did happen, that there were forces at play we had no idea about, and by the time we learned of them, it was already too late. Everything the student thought he knew about the world, about his place in it, was revealed to be irrelevant in one short moment. It's the feeling of spending your entire life on land and seeing the ocean at night for the first time. Dark and seemingly infinite, its waves wash over your feet and send a chill down your spine. Just a few steps forward and you'll drown. And that wouldn't even be a fraction of the distance between the shore and the deepest point of it. Lovecraft himself made that connection, with the horrors of his prose often invoking the imagery of sea critters. In Call of Cthulhu, the titular alien god has the head of a squid and sleeps in the city of Rite deep under the surface of the ocean, waiting for the stars to align. The people of the town of Innsmouth are weirdly fish-like, which is revealed to be due to the fact that their ancestors had freaky sex with fish people. Story by story, building a vision of the world where we sail on the surface of knowledge, and the smallest glimpse of what lurks below leads to frayed sanity and existential terror. Other authors expanded on it after Lovecraft's death, most notably August Derleth, and today we have an outright ocean of works related to the mythos, directly or not. Novels, video games, board games, movies, a tabletop role-playing system. Probably my favorite card game of all time. The list goes on. Knowingly or not, Lovecraft's creations struck some collective nerve of ours. And now whenever you talk about things beyond human understanding, someone is gonna visualize it with a tentacle. The funny thing, to me at least, is the fact that despite all this talk of humanity's insignificance and the frank cardboardness of his protagonists, individual people still play a central role in all of these stories. Aside from the obvious fact that the audience needs a point of view character to latch onto, humans play a massive role in the plans of otherworldly deities that seemingly care little for us. Erich Zann's music keeps the darkness at bay. A powerful entity with power over time and space, known as Yog-Sothoth, impregnates a human woman. Cultists of all kinds conduct dark rituals to hasten the coming of their chosen patron, and their actions are rarely described as unknowing flailing about. Despite the metaphors of how we are not but ants to these creatures, an ant could never hope to weaponize our own tools in any way, yet the people in these stories learn spells and other mystical powers at the cost of their own mental fortitude. Even in these extremely pessimistic stories, where the sentiment is always "we're fucked and there's nothing we can do about it," humanity is curious and resourceful. It has the power to either hasten the doomsday or postpone it. In a way, Lovecraft's stories are weirdly hopeful. There's almost always a hero willing to put others before himself, to buy humanity 5 more minutes of life, even if at a great personal cost. To these alien beings, the setbacks are effectively minutes of their infinite lifespans, but for us it's generations. Though, of course, there are many more people who would turn that fear into religious elation and make everything worse. No wonder that these short stories got turned into a role-playing system, and that it would include sanity as a resource. Alright, I think it's time to address the elephant in the room. What the hell even is the madness thrown around by these stories and their offshoots? It's a nebulous term, isn't it? So common in everyday use, yet lacking any foolproof definition. An accusation that is easy to throw, which in turn led it to being commonly used in fiction in a pulpy way, hand-waving away the need for characterization. Mad kings, mad scientists, the Joker. I'm not here to argue the specifics of the history of how mental health has been categorized and treated. Spice A-Track did that when discussing funny mechanics in a card game, and it ended up almost 3 hours long. I am not doing that to myself. For now, the point is, it would be easy to understand Lovecraft using the word madness as a shorthand, just like countless other fictional writers, but it is such a recurring element in his works that, by nature of repetition, it paints a certain picture of why he chose it as a constant threat, while learning about how the universe works leads to it. There are definitely symptoms that come to mind when you hear the word. Auditory and visual hallucinations, intrusive voices in one's head, acting despite one's own volition, word salad speech that seems indecipherable, mood swings with no clear reason. But all of these diagnoses hinge on external verification, on another person confirming that indeed, a patient saying that they're seeing something that's not there, or not seeing something that does indeed exist, which is called a negative hallucination, is sufficient ground to declare someone to be not of right mind. We rely on one person, or a panel of people, to have the authority to judge the subjective perception of the patient. Something they have no insight into outside of the descriptions of these experiences willingly given by those patients. And here's the thing. If I were in this position, I could easily diagnose most of you as insane. Let me play an open hand. I don't have an internal voice, my head is empty. I can replay music I've heard, I can remember what someone else said and their voice, I can also imagine something like an apple, both visual and abstract, but when it comes to my own private thoughts, it's a black box. The best description I can give is that I put in information, there's a metaphorical dial-up modem sound or the gears turning or however you want to visualize it, and then there's output. I can externalize the process if I speak out loud or write as the dial-up modem sounds are made, but if I ever talk to you and tilt my head and say, this is a lie, I learned to cover up that sound. I'm not actually thinking, or at least not in the way that you see portrayed in books and films and so on. And honestly, it's great. I don't ruminate on the past when lying in bed, so I fall asleep near instantly. Reading text is breezy when you don't have a narrator talking at an infuriatingly human speed in your head. But also, you know, I talk with people and know that my experience is not the same as the majority of people, that I'm the outlier and not the rule. And yet, if you put me in a white bathrobe, flung me back in time a century and gave me the same prominence as Freud, I could ruin so many lives. Oh my, you say you hear a voice talk to you when you read things, and the same voice makes you sad at night. This doesn't sound normal. I would know because clearly I'm normal, as I'm a successful intellectual. Let us help you and take your potential dangerous person off the streets. Please check into the Arkham Asylum tomorrow morning. Thankfully, this is just a hypothetical that will never come true, because if I really was able to travel back in time to the early 1900s, I would be beaten to death with hammers for holding a pen with my left hand. You know, like a cycle. And yet, this conflict between the norm and the truth remains unaddressed in Lovecraft's stories. The majority of descriptions of how learning the truth impacts the characters is internal self-diagnosis, using these words, for lack of better ones, to describe how they feel and what impact these revelations have on them. Society at large and its definitions of sanity do not play any role in these stories. The protagonists are not on the run from police officers that are under the orders to put them in a straitjacket because they are a menace to society. There is no voice of status quo refusing to listen to the investigators because the truth that they try to impart sounds like pointless rambling. And they themselves are, well, by the casual definition we used a paragraph ago, not insane. The things they see are true and have a palpable impact on the world, but they recoil in terror as their framework of understanding is proven to be wrong. For Lovecraft, sanity is a normative term. What we learned of our world at school is sane, and everything outside of it is madness. The characters wish that they never learned the truth, because it invalidates their entire life's experience up until the moment of discovery. In other words, they have some fucking notions about themselves and cling to them rather than re-evaluate their worldviews. They call themselves insane because they no longer fit into the world they were forced to leave behind. What was the most important things in their lives yesterday no longer matter to them. They would rather call the world of the blind sane than accept everyone else, including themselves in the past, are wrong. But you know what's really funny? Just gut-bustingly hilarious? Lovecraft really was living right next to a force greater than him, defined by alien shapes, indecipherable abstraction, atonal music, and undermining of prior worldviews. It was called modernism. The artistic movement searching for new forms of expression, spurred by the rapid industrialization, scientific advancements, and a feeling of growing alienation from the commonly prevailing morality and social conventions. And then World War I certainly didn't make these feelings go away. Now, I don't believe any researcher would categorize Lovecraft as a part of the modernist movement. His prose was notoriously flowery and descriptive outside of the monstrosities which he kept rather vague, giving the reader little room for doubt and interpretation when it came to the events themselves. Whereas the seminary work of the movement, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, provides only fragmentary images, forcing the audience to actively participate in understanding the pieces given. Similarly, while Lovecraft tended to hold on to the traditional structure of a story, modernists played with stream of consciousness and non-chronological writing. But I think nobody is going to argue that he was experimental, if in symbols used rather than the structure of the stories. And the vibes are the same. Disillusionment, death of spirituality, criticism of how accurate our portrayal of the world has been up until now, and some thought given on how we can move forward with this new knowledge. The roots of both Lovecraftian horror and modernist experimentation draw water from the same hole in the ground. And honestly, how could they not, considering they were contemporaries and shared the same era? So while I don't think Lovecraft's writing is an example of the modernist movement, I think we can safely say that due to how they were contemporaries, we can see them take similar steps forward. This will make a bit more sense later in the video, I hope. It is in that societal time frame that we find the question that Lovecraft indirectly addresses, courtesy of the guy with the coolest mustache. Friedrich Nietzsche, born in 1844, is known for many things that I will skip over in this video, hopefully to address some other time. The belief in an emergence of an Übermensch, a man beyond man, who can rise beyond the notions of good and evil and affirm their own life, following nothing but their own will. That the main driving force of people is the will to power, to assert more and more of their own control over life. That despite being German by birth, he's actually culturally Polish, which was the first time I was on the receiving end of cultural appropriation, and immediately understood why it makes people cringe. But for the purpose of this video, there is one proclamation of his that we need to address, which you probably heard a million times before, either in passing or in a movie made by a cult or a movie made by a cult. The claim that God is dead. For some reason, in popular culture, the claim tends to be associated with some degree of glee and hubris, as if he claimed to have done the deed himself. I'm not gonna lie, it is a pretty funny idea. I did name my character in SMT Nocturne Freddy exactly because it is a game about punching your way through every mythology ever. But let's look at the full quote for once, from a section known as The Madman in 1882's The Gay Science. Okay, let's do it now that you got the snickering out of your system. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? It's mournful in a way, isn't it? It's not a gloating proclamation of our power, nor is it claiming we have intentionally killed God for whatever reason. The deed is already done. The belief system that was the foundation of culture and morality for society, at least in Europe as that was the frame of reference he was writing for, is gone, destroyed by our own actions. Be it because of rapid industrialization, or the scientific discoveries making possible what was previously unthinkable. We undermined what we previously thought to be eternal truths about the world, about what it is and how it works. And this knowledge cannot be unlearned. There is no longer a universally accepted authority above us that we can call upon, be it a divine power to forgive our sins or any magical spring that can wash them away. And as such, it is on us to be the highest authority in all matters. And just like in Lovecraft's stories, the character voicing these uncomfortable truths is deemed a madman by the text. Sanity is not perceiving the world as it truly is, it is adherence to the norm. So let's phrase this sentiment, so integral to the times of Lovecraft, as a question. Can humanity take the place of a god? And the Lovecraftian answer, despite the author of these fictions being a rather outspoken atheist himself, is a very strong no. As far as his fiction is concerned, there is an inherent hierarchy of the cosmos, and we are far, far lower on it than we would ever know with our limited perspective. There are forces that can erase us without a single thought. There are more things in the universe than we could ever comprehend, and glimpsing even a fragment of that truth would devastate a person irrevocably, rendering their entire lives meaningless in comparison to that knowledge. The things that are worthy of being called gods are older, greater, eternal, and horrifying. And while his fiction didn't find much success during his lifetime, it did reach a wider audience later, and endured for long enough for me to make a video about it that skims over the details of the stories themselves, free to assume that my audience is at least somewhat aware of them. As I said, it struck some nerve, though maybe not the same nerve for everyone who likes it. There certainly is a case to make for the mythos as a metaphor for thinking you're above everyone else because your ass is depressed and you see problems others don't. Pretty sure that's what I saw in it as a teenager at least. But I don't think there would be this much longevity to it if that was all there is. The thing is, modernism did not provide a single universal answer to how the world should be. Under the same umbrella, we have both Italian futurists throwing their hat in with Mussolini and authors of works deemed degenerate by his buddies in Germany. Neither did Lovecraft's influence on fiction stop after his death. If anything, it started long after it. And just as any knowledge, these provocative questions and experiments became mundane over time. Nietzsche went from a scandalous figure to having his words appropriated by Nazis, to me naming a Japanese tattooed twink after him. Lovecraft went from a weirdo writing stories for a niche magazine for pennies talking about unimaginable things, to a name of a genre so standardized and well defined that I have a plushie of it right here. And on the topic of disappointing truths, I look like this. Hi. I can do this, but not this. My right shoulder locks up for some reason. It's been like this for a better part of the decade. And unlike the romantic, self-destructive fiction I told you at the beginning of this video, this truth is just kinda sad and disappointing. It's why it's a common truism that in horror you should never show the audience the monster, because once they see the full extent of it, how it looks like, that's it, there's no potential to it. Which is why, when it comes to horror, there should always be a bit of obfuscation to it. The time moves forward, the era shifts once more. Now the name of the game is postmodernism, though it is much harder to define than its predecessor. Not to say that modernism itself was a perfectly unified front, but the movement did have its core tenets of experimentation and reinterpretation of already existing objects, incorporating mundane items into works of art. In comparison, postmodernism in the arts is much more scattered. It takes the developments of modernism and applies its own spin onto them. Some of the works are drenched in irony and satire, anti-climaxes and subversion of expectations established by the new conventions. Some indulge in relativism, be it moral or perceptual, with the exact truth of the events never becoming known to the audience, only the various personal interpretations of it. If modernism can be roughly described as a search for a way to accurately describe the new world, postmodernism kinda gives up on the certainty of the claims made. It takes the things treated with utmost seriousness by its predecessor to play around with them. Modernism came and went, and the world, our understanding of the world, is still flawed. So, what now? Since this channel is run by a nerd, I think the most straightforward example of postmodern art would be the From Software fantasy games. According to Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of titles such as Dark Souls, Demon's Souls and Elden Ring, his approach to writing these words stems from childhood experiences of reading library books that gave him an incomplete picture of the story, be it because they were damaged or because they were in English and he did not speak the language with full fluency. As such, the description of the words in their games are fragmentary, scattered across item descriptions, sparse dialogue, and visual cues left in the level design. It's a very modernist approach in structure, but it lacks the certainty of answers given to you typical for that movement. There are always questions left. The full truth of the events that transpired will never be fully known. Intangible, unspeaking forces such as the First Flame, the Old One, or the Greater Will shape entire societies. And these civilizations have all, with no exception, already ended. The influence of all-powerful outside forces came and went, and the eternal answers they were supposed to provide are nowhere to be seen. So, what now? This is definitely an interesting approach to storytelling, isn't it? A very specific technical balancing act to make you fully believe that the truth is out there, somewhere, in the dark waters miles away from the shore you're standing on, but never giving it to you directly. Enough to make you desire the knowledge but never fully gain it. Because, well, the truth, once the initial shock wears off, is disappointing. I fully understand Miyazaki's approach because I experienced it myself. With games, films, books translated from English to Polish, or experienced in fragments with my spotty childhood understanding of the language, there was always some sense of mystery to experiencing them. That there is more to these stories than I can understand, because something was lost in translation, or I misunderstood some word or phrase, or I'm missing some implication that would dispel my doubts. And then I became proficient in the language, and it turns out some of these works just fucking sucked. I was not meant to know English, and now I suffer the consequences of my hubris. But the line has already been crossed. The shock and disappointment faded from memory, along with the pieces of media I was so desperate to learn more about. What now? With horror, we are going from Lovecraft himself to works inspired by him, directly or not, each free to use the pieces left behind however they see fit, be it in irony, straightforwardly, or to reinterpret it. The esoteric myths become commonly known, the singular beings become symbols, and then the symbols are given new meaning. You get to summon Cthulhu in Scribble Notes, a being of incomprehensible power in the original story, now at your beck and call, because its eons of experience are nothing before an optimistic child with an active imagination. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness has a novelist patronized by otherworldly beings that allow him to blur the line between reality and fiction. The protagonist of the film questions his judgment more and more, as it seems he is the only person in the world aware of it. The cosmic horror of the unknown is reduced to a power source for something much more understandable, creating and recreating, writing on the fabric of reality, as if all we ever knew was no more than a disposable pulp novel bought by something greater at a kiosk out of boredom. If FromSoft games are typically postmodern, then Bloodborne is definitely what I would call post-Lovecraft, because rather than strictly follow that author's cosmology and ideas, it has its own spin. One of the twists is that humanity is just as alien to the eldritch eternal beings as they are to us. There is no hierarchy of greater and lesser beings, just two sides looking at each other and seeing previously unimaginable horror and potential. One side is unaging, seemingly capable of disregarding laws of nature, their very blood elevating humanity, healing wounds previously impossible to heal, making us stronger, changing us physically. The other is a collective, capable of creating new life, and to commit unspeakable cruelty, to exploit even that which they do not understand to their own benefit. Several human factions are trying to gain knowledge on these eldritch beings, to gain more eyes in order to see magic and the cosmos, ideally maybe even to ascend to become one of them. Similarly, the Old Ones seem to be driven by a wish to understand us and why we possess the power to create. Not just life, but also all of the architecture you see in the game and the trick weapons you use. And in both cases, it seems these wishes cannot be fulfilled. All children sired by the Old Ones with humans are stillborn. All of the people who wish to be granted eyes on the inside turn into beasts, chairbound catatonics or just straight up dead. The two worlds are too distant from each other. And yet, in the final ending, the protagonist turns into a squid after acquiring otherworldly knowledge by eating umbilical cords left behind by the doomed newborns. In the DLC, a humanoid orphan of Kos crawls out of the body of its dead mother and beats your ass into dust driven by what seems to be sheer human-like hatred. The line is much more blurry than one might initially think. It seems, at least to me, that both humans and the Old Ones can find what they are looking for, at the cost of losing everything they were before. Or maybe I'm just confusing physical similarities with actual changes in their essence of being. Whatever is the truth, it's not for the authors to provide it to their audience. They will have to engage with the work to find their own version of it. If you're into horror spaces, you don't need to look far to find a community doing what Lovecraft did with his fiction, in a way. Things like the SCP-Wiki are basically a collection of short horror stories written in the form of reports written by the eponymous organization, with the work of tens of authors coalescing to create a world with its own Byzantine rules, myths and secrecy. Similarly, the liminal space movement went from a fascination with images of transitory empty spaces such as hotel corridors, business backrooms and such, and over time created its own mythos of things inhabiting these places. I don't have much experience with either of these, they only ever existed somewhere in the periphery of my vision, but I think it's fair to call them post-Lovecraftian in principle. We are not clueless about what lurks in the dark corners of the earth. We are meticulously cataloging and containing them, but to say we're in control of the situation would definitely be a stretch. The idea of knowledge impacting one's sanity returns in these post-Lovecraft works, though again they do not create a single cohesive picture. With non-interactive fiction like the written stories or movies, there is almost always a portrayal of how the things beyond the character's understanding influence their mental health. Sometimes it's a growing uncertainty, sometimes it's just perfectly reasonable pants-shitting horror. In Bloodborne, the more insight, the in-game resource serving as an abstraction of how much your character knows about the eldritch beings, the more vulnerable you are to frenzy, a status effect attack that just deals you a ton of damage. Interestingly though, it's not the knowledge itself harming you, but rather making you more open to a malicious attack. It's treating your mind as a channel. The wider it is, the more can pass through it, be it water or sewage. Darkest Dungeon is a real one and just calls the mental damage done to your character's stress, because that's exactly what it is. Prolonged exposure to highly dangerous, potentially unknown situations, leading to panic, trauma and sometimes even a heart attack. Reading a book won't give you hallucinations, but it will be unsettling, and if you've already gone through a lot of shit that day, it can be the last straw. Outside of these two, mental health treated as a mechanical thing akin to physical health is extremely common in games nowadays, and listing them all would be long and pointless, honestly. Oftentimes it's called sanity, but this feels more like genre inertia more than any statement on mental health and the impact of being too curious about the world. For Lovecraft, to be sane was to be deemed normal. For those following in his footsteps, to be Lovecraftian is to talk about tentacled monsters making you go mad. In both cases, prior knowledge is holding back more meaningful exploration and reflection. Ironic, isn't it? Actually no, that's not fair of me, because this is ignoring some interesting takes on the idea that appeared. In the Call of Cthulhu role-playing system, your maximum sanity is chipped away with each bit of knowledge about the dark side of the world that you gain. It is entirely mechanically possible to know too much and for that to drive your character to such despair that you need to make a new guy to play. The really interesting part is that if you study the lore from an academic perspective, not as truth but as literature and folklore, you gain the knowledge but do not suffer the damage. That is, until something, say a face-to-face encounter with an otherworldly god, makes you a believer, in which case this one encounter turns what you used to think of as trivia into a cascade of horrifying realizations hitting you all at once. Genuinely, truly fascinating take on how there is always a cost to seeking this forbidden knowledge, even if it doesn't seem obvious at first for the characters within the fiction. And there are genuine benefits to that knowledge, even if at that steep price, because it helps you identify the horrors you encounter, how to deal with them, not to mention you can learn magic. There are symbols that can just bind these things in place. These things can be fought, they can be beaten. Though honestly none of this will be any good if you actually face any being of actual power. Let's return to our Nietzschean question once again. Can humanity take the place of a god? The post-Lovecraftian answers are many, because there is no one way people take inspiration from fiction they like. Some stay the course of the original stories, others say that it is entirely possible and just as horrifying to anyone but the new deity. And some would say that it is entirely possible, but to attain divinity would be to discard humanity. And no matter how much we say how insignificant it is in the universal scale of things, are we really going to discard what defines us for some unknown, higher level of existence? Here's a quandary that has been haunting me every now and then for the past few years. If humanity ever had the power to abolish laws of nature, should we? Now, I realize this is beyond science fiction, but I am nothing if not optimistic about our potential. Assuming perfect knowledge that would let us do the deed with no damage done to anything, no harm done to animals, plants, environment, not a single atom of reality disturbed. Should we kill a god literally rather than socially? Be rid of death, unweave the constraints of time, expand our vision beyond the three dimensions, crush every barrier that stands in the way of our own creation. It sounds like a utopian vision, yet I can't help but feel on a gut level that there's something wrong with the idea. It would irrevocably sever us from our past. Every painting, every novel, every lesson taken from history up to that point, rendered worthless and no longer relating to our lives, all in a single moment. It truly would be ascending beyond humanity, and we wouldn't even need to turn into squids. But the price seems too steep. They say it's better to choose the devil you know, after all. To know what lies in the depth of the ocean is to forget what waves washing over your legs feel like. Time moves forward, ever marching. The playful irony of postmodernism becomes trite and boring. The subversion of expectations is now expected. The people look back to modernism and its sincerity in approach with a certain nostalgia. But once knowledge is acquired, it's difficult to unlearn, and postmodern art certainly wasn't all bad. Sometimes a joke is genuine. And so we arrive at metamodernism, a movement attempting to return to the roots of modernism while keeping the lessons of its successor in mind. Two cultural theorists, Timotheus Vermeulen and Robin van der Acker, describe metamodernism as a constant pendulum swing, going from sincere seriousness to joking irony, and back. Going by this framework, a Meta-Lovecraftian take would be one that is in motion between the original works and those inspired by them, both about the alien and the humanizing, flowery prose and terse snippets, knowledge portrayed as terrifying and empowering at the same time, trying to strike the same nerve as the first stories in the genre did, while acknowledging the work of others derived from them, be they satire, original takes on core ideas, or adaptations into different media. I have to admit, this working definition of Meta-Lovecraftian fiction is somewhat nebulous here, and it's honestly based on vibes more than anything else. The core element, to me at least, is the feeling of facing something truly unknown. Lovecraft's work tethered his imagination to mostly the imagery of aquatic life, but his goal was to create images that felt truly alien. To replicate that feeling, one should not tread on the path beaten by him and replicate the symbols and images, but create their own. If there's a tentacle, that's Post-Lovecraft. If there are none, but it still feels in the spirit of that fiction, it's Meta-Lovecraft. That good? No? Well, that's the best I got at this point. There is one thing that feels ironic when taking this perspective. You see, Lovecraft was a conservative, and I don't mean your uncle grilling and saluting a cop conservative. I mean monarchist, extremely xenophobic and vocally supportive of Hitler's rise to power conservative. For fairness' sake, I do need to mention he was not a singular exception in the US political landscape at the time, and he got slightly better towards the end of his life, but I would still probably give him side-eye if we shared the room. And this is just extremely funny to me, because if there's one thing I can say about most of the works I would describe as Meta-Lovecraftian, is that they're very, very non-cis heteronormative. And in retrospect, it seems so obvious. Who but the disenfranchised and oppressed would find themselves taking an interest in stories about how the truth you're seeing is different from what you've been told to believe all your life? Of monsters capable of destroying everything dear to you without paying it any thought? Of being called mad for saying these things out loud. Though I need to say, this is outsider speculation on my part, noticing what feels like a pattern and trying to put it into words. If I'm full of shit, feel free to tell me so. Anyway, let's move on to the examples. The universe of Fallen London encompasses 4 games: the titular browser game, Sunless Sea, Sunless Skies, and Mark of the Rose. The history of that world mirrors ours. Just like with Lovecraft's fiction, the cosmological elements are added on top of what we already know. Once the revelation strikes, the audience understands just how little our history is related to the true picture of the world. However, it also has some postmodern irony and playfulness to it. Sunless Sea informs you that London is underground because it was stolen by bats, and that not even a decade after that, the British tried to invade Hell and failed. You can also find an island where talking guinea pigs, fancying themselves as royalty, are locked in a civil war with the rat working class. It feels silly, tongue-in-cheek. You thought you knew what you are getting into when you bought a game about traversing an underground ocean, and one of the screenshots included a giant eye staring back at you from the ocean floor. And instead you got the rise of the Ratletariat. And for a horror game, Victorian Londoners sure are very accepting of non-normative ways of gender expression and relationships that would be considered scandalous in that time frame. Lack of sunlight aside, this seems pretty cozy. What is going on? Is this a joke? But see, there is a step in this equation that you brushed over, my dear hypothetical strawman I am demonizing for the sake of an argument. You bought the game with some expectations, and this particular brand of horror would do nothing if it gave you what you expected. It's a bit hard to talk about the terror of the unknown if you know exactly what you're getting into. So it eases you in with things that would be something that an average Londoner would find mundane by the point in which the game takes place. Rats serving as postmen here, robbery men with tentacles on their heads there, transporting souls to the gate of hell to buy cheap coal for your steamship, and so on and so forth. And when you get into the rhythm of it, the truth hits you from the left field. There is an order to things called the Great Chain of Being, a hierarchy of all living things. As one would expect from a cosmic horror story, humanity is quite low on it. And at the very top, there are judgments, the gods of reality, who dictate all of its laws. They are what we know as stars. Wherever their light shines, their laws must be obeyed. If a great terror would rise from our oceans, it would be indeed because the stars are aligned. They ordered it to do so. That is why everything in the Neve, the space to which London was relocated, is so weird. By avoiding sunlight, it can straight up disregard laws of reality. This also means that returning to the surface is not an option. Sure, staying in the Neve may let you avoid death, learn the written language of the judgments themselves that can alter reality around it, discover impossible colors of things such as shallow sleep and forgetfulness. But the moment light hits your body, all the laws you've been avoiding will get enforced. There is no coming back to a life as we, in our reality, understand it. Even if you do so unknowingly or unwillingly, even if you learn nothing from it, it changes you. And willingly participating in this new reality isn't easy either, because the new face of London is bound to leave you with nightmares. Or to stain your soul in a way that is much worse than that. To even mention sanity as a concept is downright serious given the circumstances. Be a smart fellow and stay away from wells. Nothing good is ever at the bottom of one. And why is London down there? Simple enough, a being one step down from the judgment served as a messenger between them. It was also in love with the sun, but as their stations were different, romance between them was out of the question. And so, it didn't think much when its beloved asked to deliver a love letter to another judgment. That was to be expected. What was not is the fact that the other party rejected the confession. Fearing how the sun would react, the messenger hid itself in the Neve, trying to find a way to break the news to its beloved. And in order to find a way, the messenger's, let's say servants, have been brokering deals with human rulers, saving their paramours in exchange for their city and all their subjects, all in hopes of cultivating tales of tragic romance that would serve their patron as an inspiration. London is the fifth metropolis to go down, and to be honest with you, the prospects for finding an answer are looking pretty grim. And that's like the tip of the mountain when it comes to how interesting the take on otherworldly beings of unspeakable power is. Not to mention how many knots are bound to appear when you have millennia of different cultures trying to rig the whole thing to their benefit. There is even a whole faction sharing my musings about abolishing the laws of nature. I won't say much, but I think the name Liberation of Night is plenty evocative by itself. But the most interesting part, at least to me, is that the Great Chain is a goddamn lie. Not only does a being considered to be much greater than humanity rely on us to get out of its conundrum, in the games you can also find a peculiar item, a Judgment's Egg. It looks just like a human soul, if of higher quality, without blemishes. It's not a natural, inherent hierarchy of things. It's strictly enforced by those literally above us to keep their place. The game played by gods is the same as the one played by guinea pigs and rats. The thing you laugh at and the thing striking fear into your heart are one and the same. It's just a difference of scale. And so there are terrible enigmas, ancient gods ruling over reality, hidden truths that do not conform to our understanding of the world and may indeed exceed any single person's capability to fully comprehend them. And you are denied access to it by a universe-spanning caste system. I'm also sure that, from what I've heard, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski would fit this category as well, but I barely started it and I'm horrible at reading anything particularly long in English, yet reading a translation would apparently miss the point. So that may get a video of its own someday, once I manage to finish it. Just wedging this in here. But before then, I need to rely on video games once more. Signalis. I already made a video on it in the past, so I'm not going to repeat my points in full, but here are the brass tacks. This game loves its roots. Chambers, the King in Yellow, is a major element of the narrative. Quotes from Lovecraft stories flash on screen. The gameplay itself is a love letter to the original Resident Evil. In that way, it's not really a tale of the unknown, but more of a set of infinite reflections in a mirror, if that makes sense to you. The elements are familiar, yet they stretch into such shapes that they become unrecognizable. Even in its technical layer, it implicitly asks you at which point a copy of a copy of a copy becomes its own thing. It takes our protagonist, an android named Elster, through a mining facility with all of its stuff twisted into unrecognizable shapes, meat corridors and memories of some other person, twisted by time and emotions. Elster is a replication of a familiar thing as well, having her personality based on a human soldier, just like all the other androids in this world. There is no talk of madness or any mechanic tracking her mental well-being. She has a singular drive to fulfill her promise, and that is all that matters, whatever it may mean and to whatever hell it may take her. Elster doesn't care about the grand scale of things and the truth of how it all works. The world being horrible, broken and capable of killing her at a moment's notice is frankly just another Tuesday. Being lorded over by a militaristic regime with secret police keeping tabs on everyone kinda takes away any possibility of having notions about your place in the world. Especially when you also know that your personality is a copy of some unfortunate soul, and you are literally replaceable. Throughout the entire journey, you may think that there is some alien power at play, a sleeping god making these events transpire, disassembling and reassembling people and androids without knowing how the parts fit together. The aesthetics, choice of literature and general vibe of the story just scream that there should be a Cthulhu in here. And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. There is no confirmation, no name given, no relics of a cult, no long-lost language, no talk of a higher power at all. Only its visible effects on the world. Whatever is at play, it is truly unknown. But there is Ariane. A woman who grew up under an oppressive regime, abused all her life due to not fitting into the expectations of the culture surrounding her. A woman dying from radiation poisoning, as her regime sent her off on a suicide propaganda mission, claiming she would discover new worlds while fully expecting for her to find nothing. The woman whose memories, traumas and emotions become the building blocks of this new strange world, looping over and over into infinity. The woman suspected of having psychic abilities. Alistair's commanding officer and the one she made her promise to. Alistair's sole companion and eventual lover during the years-long voyage into the void. Yes, she's definitely there. Signalis is notoriously obtuse. Just like with Bloodborne, there is so much care and detail given to the words and symbols used that you can see them connect, you can see the outline of a bigger picture, but there are also so many glaring unanswered holes as to never give you the confidence of the full story. And it will all repeat once more. Everything that Alistair does may be futile, the powers at play completely invalidating her actions and choice. Surrounded by the unknown, she may never find the one thing she knows to be true that is hidden deep within the labyrinth of abuse, sickness and trauma. But nevertheless, she has to move on to fulfill her promise. Just like Lovecraft's protagonists couldn't simply sit by and await the inevitable, neither can she. Even if she doesn't understand why. I swear this game is the only thing in the world capable of dealing me actual psychic damage. There are several ruminations and things that sprang into my mind as I was writing just these few short paragraphs, things I haven't thought of when writing the previous video, but they do not fit the topic of this one at all. It may be the closest we ever get to a video game adaptation of The King in Yellow, not the short story collection by Chambers, the in-universe theatrical play. It, more than anything, fits the bill of what I mean by the vibe of Lovecraftian fiction without the specific trappings of what he wrote. And so, here we are. What is the Meta-Lovecraftian answer to the question? Can humanity take the place of a god? Buddy, what do you mean can? Who do you think created all these myths and stories? Who do you think they were about? Take a deep look into the mirror and in the reflection you'll see the unknown depths of an ocean. You will spend your entire life trying to understand it and not even leave the shore by the end of it. The thing you see can destroy you without a thought. It can grant you secrets you would never think of before. It will warp everything around it to its unknowable whims. And yet this water is the clearest thing you'll ever see. Everything outside of it is even darker and more enigmatic. That is the nerve the original story struck, I think. That we don't even know ourselves, yet try to understand how anything else works. For Howard, it was, in rather ugly terms, us not knowing our place. But after decades of his stories living on, existing side by side with all these shifts in culture, growing international connections, and giving anyone with any interest in art a million of perspectives to look at their own experiences, it became quite easy for anyone to get a glimpse of the unknown. You're experiencing it right now in a way. The first translation of Lovecraft's stories into Polish were published in 1983, 2 years after they were already entrenched in the United States enough to get a tabletop role-playing game. The first translation of Chambers' The King in Yellow didn't even come out until 2014. Just this shift in time is bound to change how I think about these stories, when other authors taking inspiration from them would show up in my life, the way I first encountered names such as Azathoth or Hastur. My way of thinking about these tales is bound to be different from yours. Because there are invisible, terrifyingly powerful forces shaping our lives. It's just that they are all man-made. And putting aside my attempt at the quasi-scientific categorization of all these stories in this video, I think it's genuinely fascinating that the works of a white boy that couldn't write an interesting character to save his life has managed to spark the imagination of so many people other than him in so many different ways. And encountering these stories or their adaptations is bound to suddenly give you insight into a whole artistic genre you might have never heard of before. Seek out more of its works. See them where your eyes just previously glossed over and capture your interest. And then you'll get weird looks at a party when in a drunken stupor you mention getting that shogofusi, making you realize no one else in the room knows what the hell you're talking about. And if that's not just the funniest goddamn way for fiction to embody its own contents, I don't know what is. Okie dokie, we've had our fun categorizing things in an arbitrary way and dramatizing our everyday experiences. But hey, that's what fiction is for after all. I wouldn't be here if I didn't love this silliness. But there is one more thing I gotta do before closing the curtain. In this video, I opened with a spoken lie, a story my brain spun. In the middle, I gave you a visual disappointing truth. It's only right that we close off with one more tale totally unrelated to the structure of this video. I had a weird experience when I was a child, about 4 or 5 years old. I was always skittish and jumping to weird conclusions, which are now laughable, but this one still stands out in my memory. One night, when playing around in the living room, I took a volume of the encyclopedia from the shelves and opened it. I couldn't read yet, but I wanted to pretend I do. You know how children are. And between the cover and the first page there was this abstract pattern. And in my overactive childish imagination I saw... I don't know what I saw. Devils? Carnage? Whatever it was, it terrified me. I cried, screamed, and, if my memory serves me correctly, fainted. Surprisingly, I stayed away from opening that particular book for a long time. But when I was about 10 or so, I remembered that and decided to locate the book again to confront my toddler self. We moved houses in between these events, but I was deadly certain we had the same collection of encyclopedias on the shelf. The covers looked the same after all. So I steeled myself, took the first volume, opened it, and... nothing. There was no pattern there. I just saw 2 blank blue sheets. And when I asked my parents about this, not only did they confirm that we had these books for all this time, they did not recall the event I still remember so vividly at all. And I'm sure they were in the room when I made all that fuss. Is this story true or false? I genuinely don't know. I will never know. And I don't even think I want to know, considering the implications of any possible answer to the questions it raises. Okay, that's it for the video. It's 4 AM as I'm writing this and I feel like a corpse. I have no idea what even is this video at this point, but I do know I wanted to make it. Huge thanks to my Patreon supporters making this thing possible, now visible on the screen. Shoutouts to the new names in the fray, Alkorenshi and Michael Davies. Next time we'll get back to video games. Most likely Elden Ring, cause I think I'm onto something with that game. Korean poetry and tales of whaling after that. I'll see you then. I'm going to bed.